Some of you younger people are wondering what is going on. You would have grabbed the catalog and tried to, make it bigger or smaller, and there was none of that. You just had to have a highlighter or a pen and tear out those sheets and make sure that your family saw them. And so I've got a couple of some of those early Christmas ads that some of you might remember. I just searched on the internet to find a few that stuck out to me. Watermark on that photo, so that's a copyright. But when E.T. is your spokesperson, you're in the 80s, I guess. So that speak and spell, some of you may have had that along the way as a gift that you wanted. We had a time this week where I got with some of our bridge kids and we filmed some things that we might be showing you in the coming weeks. But I gave them some of these retro gifts, and that silly putty blew their minds. They did not know what to do with that. Teddy Ruxpin, for some of you, was a gift that you wanted. That never made my list. I think I'd aged out, I guess. I don't know, but that wasn't for me. But there are some other gifts that I did remember. Some of you Star Wars nerds are probably still looking for that gift, and that's cool. Be proud of who you are if you love that. Those Care Bears, the little jingles and the songs were the death of me watching television. Light Bright, which that was one of those gifts we had our kids in the back take a look at, and they said, "Oh, like paint by numbers?" Yeah, I get a little bit like that. And then the racetrack, and we actually gave away one of those in the first service, one of those racetracks, if you remember that. We're giving gifts, and I've got another one of those gifts. I won't tell you which one. It's not the Jeff Gordon one, but I want to give this away to somebody, and I found out this week that I'm not even sure. Yeah, I found out one of my friends also has a birthday this week. So Merry Christmas and Happy Birthday. Sheena, come get your gift up here. Come on up. Come on up. There you go. Merry Christmas. You can come down front. That's okay. That's okay.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
29 again. We're glad for Sheena. So Merry Christmas and Happy Birthday to you. Your husband may or may not have let the cat out of the bag on that one, but we're glad to be able to have you here with that. But it is that Christmas time, and there's something about gifts that we feel like we need to wrap them. You don't just grab a sack of gifts and say, have at it, find the one that's yours. There's a need to wrap. And it's something about the wrapping that gives a little bit of the, this is expensive, or this is important, or whatever it may be. When a gift is not wrapped, you just assume if they didn't take the time to get excited enough to wrap the gift, then why should I get, excited about opening the gift? Because when it is unwrapped, it feels a little undone. It feels a little maybe broken. It feels like it was an afterthought, like maybe you stopped by the store on the way to my house because you forgot that we're exchanging gifts. And it just doesn't feel special. It doesn't feel important. And when we go back to the first Christmas, although most of us in this room now realize what an awesome, awesome day and gift that first Christmas was, the truth for those that were experiencing it was that it was very unwrapped. And the entire experience felt very unwrapped. And if you go back through all the little elements that even led up to that first Christmas, all of those were unwrapped as well. And so I want us to spend a few moments taking a look at some of these unwrapped portions of the story to try to figure out maybe why God chose not to wrap them, why we experienced them the way they did, and then maybe it's just God just chose to, and maybe He was trying to tell us something as He chose to give us unwrapped gifts. The first one is in Isaiah chapter 11. We actually read this verse last week as a part of the message there. But Isaiah was present way before Jesus was born, but he was way after the time of King David and his father Jesse. So he's giving a prophecy looking forward, but he tags this thing that happened before he was around. In Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, he says, "A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him." So he's talking about something that's coming. We would later realize that he's talking about the first Christmas, the birth of Jesus. But he calls back to something else, this idea of Jesse and this family tree, and he calls it the stump of Jesse. Now, when someone comes from a successful or at least perceived to be a successful family, we wrap that. We talk about it. We present it. We want to make sure that people know, because there's something about that people group that he came from. There's something about the people from which he came that tells us something about who he is. When someone does not come from a perceived to be successful kind of family, we just leave it out. We don't talk about it. Like if I've got some friends now who we're of the age where daughters are teenagers or young adults and they're dating or getting engaged. And so when I find out a buddy of mine has a daughter who has fallen in love or maybe gotten engaged, I'll ask, hey, what's he like? How do you feel about that? This boyfriend or this fiance? And if he comes from a successful family, inevitably it will be, well, he seems to be a really great kid. His dad's really successful. He owns this or owns that, or he does this or does that. This is his job. And mom's really sweet, really successful. She has this business or this responsibility. You hear all of it early on. I never ask about the parents. I just said, how do you feel about him? And we get all this stuff. Well, when my friends have daughters who fall for guys whose family tree is not that impressive, they do not say, well, Dad's not a very hard worker, but he's a nice guy, and Mom, well, she's not much to look at, but she's sweet. Like no one says that. That is incredibly rude, and none of us, whether you're thinking it or not, you do not say that. What we say, or what my friends say, is, he's got a good head on his shoulders. Like, don't even talk about the parents. Like, just leave that out. Like, he seems to have a good head on his shoulders. He seems to be making good decisions. He makes my daughter happy. And there's no talk about the stump when the stump's not very royal. Well, the stump of Jesse was not a very royal stump. There was nothing really there. There's nothing to talk about. We don't know much about Jesse because there was nothing to say. Jesse's one of those guys that when his wife's dad had his friends going, hey, I hear your girl's falling for Jesse. You like him? Good head on his shoulders, seems to be making good decisions. There's nothing really to talk about. Now, he did have a little bit of ancestry that we know. There was someone who's not even a part of the Hebrew story until she married into it. Her name was Ruth, and we have an entire book there. She's a foreign lady that married into the family, and she ultimately was his grandmother. But we don't hear much about Jesse's family because it wasn't that special. Until Samuel, the priest, showed up and said, God's going to give Israel a new king, and it's you. And he pointed to the youngest son of Jesse, someone who wasn't much to talk about, but he was the one chosen. Now, ironically, this week, I didn't know this till this week, I was looking at the meaning of words and names, and Jesse, the name Jesse means gift. And there is a little similar word that is wealthy. So not necessarily wealthy gift, but his name comes from both of those ideas, a gift and wealth. But because Jesse was unimpressive, because we don't know anything before then, we really lose sight of the value. We lose sight of the gift until David is chosen and David ultimately became king. But right there, we know that there was a plan in place. God already knew what he was doing ahead of time. But we do get an indication as to maybe why God chose David, in spite of the fact that he did not come from an impressive line of rulers or royalty. We have in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, a verse that every young Christian man has held on to try to explain why he's not the terrible person that he's told he is. The Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. These are the moments where we try to convince ourselves, no, my heart is good. I know what I did, or I know what, but my heart is good. Well, there's real truth there. And God looked down at a kid who really didn't have a whole lot to show at this point in his life. He was too young to have accomplished anything. He was just incredibly brave, incredibly courageous. And we know that he spent time in prayer. He spent time even writing songs about how he loved to worship God. We know he was writing before this time as a child. And God looked down at him and said, his heart is like mine. His heart beats for me. His heart is after me. He allows me to be the source of his strength and his courage and his bravery, and that's the kind of kid that I want to use. And immediately then this unwrapped family, this undone, unwell family, this unimpressive family, this unknown family became something much, much more. So Jesus seemingly came from unwrapped people. And at times we look at our own lives and where we came from, the baton that was passed down to us, and sometimes it's not very impressive. Some of you are not continuing a legacy of strong, brave, courageous followers of Jesus. You're actually starting something brand new. And I've said it many times before, but I just feel like it needs to be said. I admire you and respect you more than perhaps anyone else I know. People who did not come from a long line of believers, and you are starting something new. You're doing something I cannot even imagine how difficult it is. And I applaud you, I respect you for it, I admire you for it, and I have a lot of grace for you when you don't get it right, because you didn't have someone saying, this is the way to go. So if you're in that boat, realize that in many ways you mirror what was going on and leading up to that first Christmas when Jesus, the gift, seemingly came from a long line of unwrapped people. People you didn't really talk about, people you didn't mention again. But God chose to work through that family. And there's more. We have this idea of Bethlehem, where Jesus was actually born, that tends to make us wonder why. There was a big city. There was Jerusalem. It was already there. It wasn't what it would eventually become, but it was there. But Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Well, in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, we have another prophet like Isaiah who was preaching about the coming of this first gift, although people didn't realize what it was going to be about and how it was going to unfold. And in verse 2 of chapter 5, he says, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times." So Bethlehem was known to be eventually the place where the Savior was going to come. Now they're looking for a military leader. They're looking for a lot of different saving that has zero to do with being saved from their sins. They're looking for something completely different, but they do know that Bethlehem is going to be a place where this individual ultimately is going to call home. Well, why Bethlehem? Well, it was David's hometown. So there was that census that was given, that people had to go back to their ancestors' hometown and basically say, I'm here, and give a census for this is my family, this is where we are, where we live, how many people, on and on. So they have this census that's being taken. So they're going back to Bethlehem because it's his hometown. But beyond that, it's just a little village full of farmers who have a ton of grain fields, and that's where they work. I even read one stat that said there were fewer than 200 people in the entire village. I'm not quite sure how anyone knows that, but people write stuff. So we know it's small. Let's just say smaller than our city. We know it was a very small place, a little village full of grain fields. And it was originally a place that was settled even before the promised land was given to the people of Israel. But when they conquered it, they realized this settlement had some potential. All of these farming opportunities were there. So instead of calling it Ephrath, they said, we're going to have a new name. We can make a lot of bread here. So let's just call it the House of Bread. So Bethlehem means house of bread. They looked at all the potential, and they said, we'll call it House of Bread. And then down the road, about 30 years later after Jesus is born, Jesus steps in and says, hello, bread people. I am the bread of life. And if you eat my bread, you will never, ever be hungry again. So that's too far. We'll get to that at Easter, I guess. But that's where he's from. We've got this idea of this small town, the small village with really nothing to talk about. And although geographically it may not be the case, some of you feel like in a way that you are at an unwrapped place in your own life. There are a lot of things that are undone, a lot of questions that have yet to be answered, a lot of tension that is still unresolved. You've got things that are still hanging in the air. Some things are 50-50. Is my marriage going to last? Is this relationship going to last? Are we going to push through here? Am I going to make this decision? Will I have my job this time next month or this time next year? where are we financially, and on and on. You've got all of this undone, unwrapped kind of stuff in your life. And you're at a season in which you assume that you have too many moving parts. And you're just not in a place really for God to use you in a significant kind of way. But once things get settled down, once you have some of these answers given, once you have some of these issues resolved, then you can start to dream again about what could be. Then you can begin to pray and ask and even expect for God to do great things. But if we look back throughout history, that's not really the path and the course that God most of the time chose. He chose to not just work through unwrapped people, but he worked through unwrapped people in unwrapped kinds of places who are in very difficult, very fluid places of life, and God chose to use them then. And Bethlehem was just an incredible example of this. Why allow Mary to be pregnant before they're going to have to travel? Obviously, God took the initiative. She became pregnant when he determined she was going to be pregnant. He knew a census was going to be taken, and he timed this where in 9 months she's going to actually be in this town of Bethlehem that's not going to have room for all the visitors that are coming into town. It's going to be very uncomfortable. There are a lot of questions, and you still have a family that's working through some challenges that we'll get to in a minute. Why Bethlehem? Why this way? But God often used those unwrapped places in life to do some of his greatest work. And then there's one more aspect to this, and it's the most overwhelming unwrapped aspect of this. And it's just the idea that Jesus would be born to a virgin girl, to be the child of a virgin. In Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, hundreds of years before Jesus was here, we have this prophecy that I don't know that people truly understood what Isaiah was saying. Maybe Isaiah didn't even fully grasp it all. But he has this prophecy. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. God has given order to the family. There is a moment where a man asks another woman, hey, would you want to make a family? You want to be together? You want to be my wife? Or if you travel back a few hundreds of years, hey, my son needs a wife. Hey, your daughter, But either way, they come together, and then there's a child, God willing, and the family begins to grow. When that order gets out of whack, I don't have to explain what I'm talking about there. When the order is upset, there are challenges, difficulties, and there are things to hurdle. And just about every single one of us and all of our families have someone or multiple people who have been through that. And maybe that has been a road that you've been traveling, where there's just some difficulties that go along with having the order different than God designed. But yet we look at this story of Mary, and we feel like, at times, everyone gathered around, oh, congratulations, Mary, the Holy Ghost gave you a baby. Like that really is, we don't have any indication that there was that kind of excitement. And however, you think a teenage girl would feel when she had a dream and was told that God was going to get her pregnant. However you think she felt, most likely that's exactly the way she felt. Now, there's a lot of faith and a lot of trust, and we find that in her response. So maybe she's a little different than your average teenage girl, but she's still a teenage girl. And there's a lot to work through emotionally, physically, relationally, explaining to your fiance, trying to tell your parents this is what's going on. There is just so much here. The first Christmas was filled with chaos, filled with questions. There was a little bit of, should I even be afraid or ashamed? Should there be even any guilt that I'm experiencing? It was incredibly messy. And then you add on top of that a supernatural secret that Mary had to carry, because who in the world is going to believe what actually happened to her? She has friends just like everyone else. They notice a change. What's going on? Well, It's the, never mind. Anyway, we're getting married. It's a lot to go on. It's a lot to explain. And yet that first Christmas was filled with it. Why this way? It had to be this way. If Jesus had been born just the way each of us was born, he would have carried on with him the curse of sin, had been passed down from generation to generation, and he would not have been the unblemished, perfect sacrifice that eventually he would be when he gave his life for us after 33 years of living here. But if he had just been a complete miracle, just dropped out of heaven into Mary's lap, he's not human and he's not able to be that for us because he's not one of us. But Jesus was able in this way, with this virgin birth, to be a man and to be fully God, to not have that curse of sin on, so that he could be the perfect sacrifice, his life for ours. Our death gets covered in his death as he dies for us. It's said this way later on in the book of Hebrews, when Jesus is compared to a high priest. A priest is someone who would make sacrifices for the people. The problem was all of the priests of the past and any preacher, minister today is still sinful as well. So he has to ask forgiveness and the people have to be forgiven as well. All of that because we're all broken and all imperfect. We're all under the same curse of sin. But in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 26, it says, "For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest," speaking of Jesus, "holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself." So he's the perfect sacrifice because of this nature, and this is the only way that it was going to be able to happen, for him to be born this way. But to think that in some way this was not hard and challenging and difficult for everyone involved would be to miss the point of really what went on. Jesus seemingly came in a very unwrapped kind of way, in an unwrapped place to unwrapped people. It was an incredibly unwrapped Christmas. Well, why? I don't know that I can fully answer, any of us can fully answer why God chose the details that he chose. But I do know these things. When God gives us unwrapped gifts, they always point to something else. When God gives us an unwrapped gift, something that is different than what we thought, or even what we thought to be wise, when God brings people into our lives that don't fit the bill, when he brings moments into our lives that should not have happened, when he does things for us that in no rational way should have ever been able to happen, it's God pointing to himself, and it's pointing to something more, reminding us that we are not in control of all of this. When he shows up and says, "Jesse, one of your kids is going to be king," it is very clear at that moment that God is up to something, because this is not the kind of person that God chooses to be the leader of Israel. When God spoke to Mary and said, "You are going to have my son," it was very clear. Mary could take no credit for this. No one could. God was up to something bigger. He was up to something more. And at times we want to live life with just the sure thing, making all the wise decisions. Put your pros and your cons board up at your house and go, "This is why we should do this." Everything has to be rational, and that's fine. Wisdom is a good thing. But there are some moments in life, and I would argue even some of the best moments in life, when it just doesn't add up. This should not be. And it is. And it's God pointing to himself, saying, there is something more. There's something greater. You're not as in control as you thought you were. I've got you in this. It also puts the pressure on him. When God gives us an unwrapped gift, when God doesn't answer our prayers the way we ask, but he does it in a completely different way, God's taking responsibility for that. He's saying, "I know you don't want to do this, but I'm telling you, I've got this, and I'll take responsibility for how it goes." I was watching one of the championship games yesterday. I forget which conference it was. Actually, the Big 12, I do remember. But I was watching the game, and along the way, the team with the ball on offense at the 30, 35-yard line, it's 4th and 2, punt the ball. That's what you do early, and you don't. And they chose to go for it. And not only go for it, but they called a play where the quarterback goes back and just heaves one up 50 yards in the air. I'm watching it going, that coach should be fired. And then he called it. I was like, that is a very smart play. That was very. I had no dog in it. I didn't care who won the game. Didn't like either team. But I watched him, thought, oh, going for it. You kidding me? And then when he steps back to pass, I thought, this is awful. Fire him right. Oh, good job. Good job. That was it. And there are so many times when I look at how things should unfold for my family, for me personally, for our church family, I'm thinking, no, that's God, no, not now. It's not the time. It's not the place. It's not the, oh, I see you. All right. God saying, I'll take responsibility for how this turns out. God wasn't oblivious to the fact that David had no resume. God wasn't shocked to find out that Mary wasn't already married. He understood what was going on. He was choosing to do those things so that people would point up and go, there's something going on here. There's something more than this. And it was also God saying, I'll take responsibility for it. Mary can do this, and I'll be with her. And she'll get through this, and she'll be the perfect one to raise my son. I've got this. And our own power doesn't make sense, but God took responsibility for that. And also, when God gives us unwrapped gifts, it promises that a change is coming. And so you better pay attention. When God starts moving in your family in ways that you can't understand, when God starts opening doors for you that you never really even asked for and don't feel prepared for, you better start paying attention because God is up to something different. That's what happened when Mary went to go visit Elizabeth, her cousin. She walked in, and Elizabeth, who was also pregnant, her baby just started dancing inside of her belly for joy. Elizabeth, she got it. She was like, we're about to be in a new age here. This is going to be special. Something is up. Even unborn babies are leaping in their mama's belly right now. There is something happening. And God knew that He was about to change everything. Not just by giving a gift, but by giving an unwrapped gift. And my hope for you this Christmas is every time that someone presents you with an unwrapped gift, because it's an awkward shape, or because they didn't have time, or just because that's just who they are, don't think about the gift itself. Just be reminded that every unwrapped thing in your life, your past, your parents, your place in life right now, all the ways in which you had planned your life to be and it didn't work out, all of those unwrapped things are still perfect for God's story. And He will write you into His story, and He will put you in places that you never thought possible if you'll just celebrate Him where you are. Trust Him in the mess. Don't worry about the wrapping, and just know that He is up to something. Your unwrapped life does not disqualify you from your place. If anything, it puts you in a prime spot for God to work through you, as He did David, as He did Mary, and as He has for centuries.